My name's Joel Miller. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I am the owner, restorer of the 1966 World Champion Street Eliminator NHRA 58 Corvette called the Pooch. The car was built by Deloy Nabe in Brighton, Colorado in the 1964-5 time frame, and competed successfully in throughout the United States, mostly in the Denver and Central America area, but also went to Pomona and India a time or two. Deloy was Dutch. His dad had a General Auto shop in Brighton, Colorado, and Deloy and his brother Herb grew up around the shop. They were shop rats, and he became a very good mechanic. And the whole family's background was dirt racing at Lakeside Speedway in Denver, and they were fairly successful. And in the late 50s, Deloy was married and busy having children and whatever, and he decided that he would do something less dangerous, I suppose, and go drag racing. And he started with a 55 Chevrolet two-door post and raced it in a C-modified production class, or started off with 265 in it running stock class, and then in 61-2 time frame, he was fortunate enough to have a very good friend whose last name was Estes, whose brother was up the food chain with Pontiac Motor Division, and lo and behold, two new 327s show up at Deloy's shop in sometime in 61. So they both put these motors in their 55 Chevrolets and campaigned them. That was a very tough class to be running. Although he was successful, he decided that he wanted to go another route, and he knew of this very, very bad 58 Corvette sitting in a shed somewhere in the just west of Denver, and he went and picked it up and bought it for probably scrap, and brought it home to the garage, and his pit crew that had helped him with the 55 said, "Deloy, you've lost your mind. This car is terrible. Numerous colors, falling apart, cracked up, whatever." And they said, "That thing is a real dog." And Deloy said, "Yeah, it's Pooch." And they decided right then that they were going to call it the Pooch. So he first began campaigning the car in 63-4 time frame with a 10 over 283, made 286 cubic inches, and ran C-modified production and C-modified sports. There were some rule changes along through there that he went from one to the other, maybe back and forth or whatever, but anyway, he was fairly successful there. And he decided he wanted to really get more serious about this thing, and he said, "You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the numbers just right on the horsepower per weight of the car deal, and get serious about it and see what we can do maybe away from Denver." So they did some computations, and he stocked up on late 56 265 motors and overboard 10 that made 268 cubic inches, and he needed to weigh 13 pounds per cubic inch to run D-modified sports, as it was. And so the chore then was to add weight to a curb weight 3,000 pound car to get it up to 13 pounds per cubic inch. So he wound up adding enough weight to get it to 13.23 pounds and the car weighed 3,547 pounds when he had finished adding his weight. And contrary to what we all thought at the time, being novice drag racers, one had to run a positraction or a weld to spiders or whatever. He never ran a rear end of that sort at all. He always ran an open rear end. And kind of what he did was he went again against convention, and he added unsprung weight. The rear end housing from drum to drum, I would say weighed 500 to 700 pounds, and he did this by welding aluminum plate cavities on the bottom of the rear end housing, filling them up with lead. And in addition to that, he took 5/8 bolts and welded them forward from the plate lead containment deals, where he could hang barbell weights over them and put a nut on it to hold them on. So he could make the right rear of this car or as heavy as he wanted to, or the left rear or whatever. But the result was a lot of twisted axles. And so he tells me he launched at around 9,000 RPM with a 70-pound flywheel, and it spun very little and ran really tall gear. He ran up in the six something gears with a 254 passenger to 1 low gear passenger car transmission, and this thing it rolled out fast. And
did you ever 60-foot times?
No, 60-foot times, I don't think I knew what a 60-foot time was at that time. We're talking early to mid-60s. Maybe people were judging that then, but
You got some time slips, don't you?
I've got all the time slips.
Does it show 60 foot on those slips?
No, that does not. In 1966, does not show that. But I've got the time slips from his winning the World Championship in '66. I've got the Wally that's not like the Wallies now, the trophy that was a Wally back then, prior to his passing in 14. He saw that I got this stuff, and he knew that this stuff should remain with the car. He wanted it to remain with the car. And I've got his jacket, and this car is so well documented. When he sold the car, he had moved from Denver to Tijeras, New Mexico, which is a suburb of Albuquerque, around 70, after a short stint, 1 or 2 year stint, as owner of Rocky Mountain Dragway in Denver. That was right on the back side or the north side of the arsenal there. And he ran that for a year or two, and I don't think that was a good business venture for him. And he left there and went to Tijeras, New Mexico. Drug the car along with him. Had no engine in it at that time. He had sold the engine to someone in the
right, and it had aluminum heads on it, and they came and wanted it back, and he never gave it back to them.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, this guy.
I mean, that could have happened, I guess, or did happen. But they were reputedly not very good heads.
Right.
John Nees, I think, might own a set of those.
Oh, okay.
If I'm not badly mistaken, but they weren't anywhere near where the aluminum heads are today, or were 10 years ago, for that matter. So just maybe, some of the Le Mans C1s could have had aluminum heads. Don't know.
I'm good.
In that area, but brought the roller with him, and it sat in his yard for 10 or 12 years in Tijeras, and some fella came by there and wanted to buy it. He sold it to him and didn't really pay attention to who it was that bought it. But he had a very elaborate scrapbook that his wife had kept, full of documentation on everything, and he gave it to this gentleman. When I bought the car in 2009, it was on eBay, and I had just finished doing a 57 and a 62 that I ultimately took on the Duntov Award, and I was looking for something to do after these, and John Neese suggested that why don't you try to buy a drag car, because with something that's done something of note. And I said, okay, I'll keep my eyes open. And so we saw this one night on eBay, and before I knew it, I owned the thing, sight unseen, and for crazy money. And Don Partridge and I went to Albuquerque and picked it up. Well, in the meanwhile, I found that Deloy was still living, and I chatted with him, and he was anxious that I'd bought the car, and he said, you know who you were bidding against on it? And I said, no, I don't. He said, I'm told now that it was my son-in-law that was going to buy it back and restore it for me. And he said, but he didn't need to be spending that kind of money on me, so he said, I'm glad you got it. And he said, I want to do everything within my power to help you restore the car as close as possible to the way I raced it and the way it looked. And he was really religious on that. And I would talk to him every week or so, and I could go over fine details, and he'd say, now let me think about that. And then a day or two later, he'd say, okay, here's what I did here. And so Don Partridge and I brought it back to Tulsa. Don was with me all along on this, and we restored it and tried to be as true to the way it raced as possible. People say, well, why did you do it gray? Well, it was in gray primer when he raced it. And he said, I didn't want to spend money on paint. He said, I had an engine and transmission rear end to spend money on. So he had a lot of help. He befriended Dean Moon along the way, and Dean facilitated his getting a set of Mondello heads. And Dean had a cam grinder by the name of Bill Jinks, who was just a guru. And he worked with Deloy on developing several different configured roller cams for the car. And in '64, he ran it with two carburetors. And he wound up in '65 starting the year in carburetors, and halfway through the year, I think he got a set of small tube Kilburn injectors with Dean's help, and that was he ran injectors the rest of the way. And the big race at Tulsa was the money run. Was the most notable thing there was he beat Joe Lunati in his Devon bodied car, and Lunati was very, very fast. Of course, Lunati had to spot him, but he held on and won. But the money run was against Ferd Nafel, the Storming Bull from the East Coast, and he was running, I think, maybe F-gas, and so Deloy had to spot Ferd 0.3 of a second, and he ran him down. And I asked Deloy, I said, what did you think about that race? And he said, you know, he said, I was really upset with myself because I thought I'd lost. It was so close. He said, I looked over there and it looked to me like Ferd was ahead of me, but the clocks don't lie. And he said, I won. He said, we were neck and neck. And he said, just to think, he said, when I got back to the pits, I had a broken rocker arm. So he said, I did it with a handicap. So that was kind of the way that went. And the car's really done a lot. And maybe the race, that race was arguably the first nationally televised drag race on on television. It was done by Diamond P Sports with Keith Jackson, Steve Evans, and Bernie Partridge doing the commentary. And as I'd said before, Deloy passed away in 2014, but I'm blessed to have met the man. He was really a free spirit fella. He had a towing company. He had an airplane. He had been an over-the-road trucker, as well as a general line mechanic, and just a fantastic guy with a great family. And this whole experience has been over the top for me, and I wouldn't take anything for it. And also, I've got to thank Don Partridge for his help day in, day out, and John Neese's encouragement to do this. This has been a real plus for Joel Miller.
Did he run the gas tank like this that you have on the front of this?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a Moon?
That is a Moon.
That is a Moon? Okay. What did he do in the front end?
The front end, it's peculiar the way he kind of set this car up, and he took some 4-inch channels tall and welded them back to back, creating a 4-inch I-beam. Why, I don't know, because you can buy 4-inch I-beams. But he placed them between the frame and the front end to jack the front end up. In the rear, it really loose. In the rear, he ran no bands on his springs at all. There were just, the spring center bolt was there, but no bands at all. And he ran a coil spring in addition to all the weight and all jacking around back there. He ran a coil spring, which I understand now was common, that ran from the top of the rear end housing up to the bottom of the frame. So he had it set up that way. I found that might have been a passing fancy, because the spring was not there, but the lower coil was still welded to the rear end housing, and the upper coil was still welded to the bottom of the frame. However, somebody had fire axed all the coils out of it. So, experimentation was the rule of the day at that time, and we found just an awful lot of peculiar things that had been done, and probably on a week in, week out basis, they would just
Try something new.
Can we get another tenth here or there, or whatever. But the axles that were in the car when I got it were twisted at least 1/8 of an inch. And but he did tell me that prior to going to any meet, he would hit the salvage yards and get plenty of spare axles. So that's it.
So did you put new axles in there now?
To avoid that happening again, I got some, although I don't plan on racing the car, I had some larger, more bulletproof axles built for the rear end. So that's the story of the Pooch.